Talking about comic books now and taking them seriously, so I guess I started to look the part. Ponytail, helmet strap, kimono, well, robe. I'm already fat, so that's covered. Oh, can you see this hole in the wall? Yeah, that's new. I consider myself a fan of this motherfucker right here, and I've read a fair few comic books starring him. And also, he has a new film coming out soon, directed by James Gunn, one of my favorite action big blockbuster directors working today. Like him and Gore Verbinski and Michael Bay and Sam Raimi. He's got a movie coming out next year. Excited. So I decided to watch all of his movies. For some reason, I accidentally did it in reverse. Well, I watched Man of Steel first because it was on Netflix, and then I decided to watch Superman Returns. Like, fuck it, I guess I'm watching all these in reverse. And it was kind of interesting. Let's talk about them, shall we? There was the Max Fleischer and Dave Fleischer short films. The animation holds up even to this day. I watched some of that Batman Amazon show that had that really cool poster for a long time, and then the first episode just had the most underwhelming sheep animation possible. And then I just went back and watched the Fleischer cartoons from a billion years ago, and I was like, man, why can't it look like this? I know those were like really well funded, like they had like millions of dollars behind every 12-minute short, but I don't know, man, you could try and do that. It's been 80 years. That was a nice palate cleanser. They really hold up. I should log them on Letterboxd. And they really embody that kind of thing of Grant Morrison talking about. The key word in Superman isn't hope. It's not hope comics, it's action comics, and how he's someone who like punches bullies. That's what he does. That's his goal. That's his thing. It's not to be this kind of vibe of goodwill and good old days Americana. That's not his thing. It's about taking motherfuckers down, you know?
A lot of people apply this concept of hope to Superman, and while I appreciate it and I get what they're talking about, I think that's the wrong approach. And to me, Superman doesn't sum up hope. Superman's keyword is action. He didn't appear in hope comics, he appeared in action comics. And Superman is not someone who just floats in space, ethereal with his cape flying, and suggests somewhere we could eventually reach. Superman says, no, do it now. Superman is a physical figure. He moves through the world in a very physical way and he gets shit done. And I think that's way more important than the notion of Superman as a messianic or Christ-like or even quasi-religious figure. Superman is a mensch. He gets in there and he gets shit done and he protects the vulnerable, and that's what it's all about. If you're weak, if you're in trouble and somebody's coming to mess you, Superman steps in and punches the guy out. He doesn't tell you to turn the other cheek, he punches out bullies, and we have to remember that. That's the essential quality of that character, I think. And I think we need that guy, you know? We really need to feel there is someone who will do that.
Like Superman Smashes the Klan and some of their own Action Comics work. I remember, because that interview came out April this year, but in the back of maybe Action Comics number 1 or 2, the New 52 version, Grant Morrison said something similar about how they wanted to take the Action Comics, they wanted to make it feel action, very physical, very movement heavy. And they did that very well until the end of their run, where that became a little bit unreadable to me. Not as in unreadably bad, just like literally I could not keep track of every funny, weird Mr. Mixus-Pidlick fifth dimensional name. There's like 50 of them, and it just becomes so weird and trippy. I'd like to reread it because I'm sure I missed something, but like, Jesus. It became a little bit of a chore. No offense. Anyway, those are good. Then there was the Kirk Alyn serials. They did 2. But everyone knows that film serials don't count as real movies unless they're directed by Louis Feuillade. For some reason, everyone counts those. But let's talk about the real first Superman movie. I know you've been waiting for it. That's right. Superman and the Mole Man. So there was the TV series starring George Reeves, but before that, there was a proof of concept feature-length movie. Well, feature-length according to the American Film Institute. I think the British Film Institute constitutes it has to be 70 minutes, while it's like 40 minutes elsewhere. Anyway, so this is about 59 minutes. Really short. It's a proof of concept for the TV show. It's really cheap. There's a bit where the camera pushes in on Clark, and you can see, I think it's like the boom mic. You just see this really long shadow, and I don't mind that. It's kind of charming to me. And it's interesting to see how even like a cheap movie like this has naturally more complex blocking and longer shots that hold longer and conversation that don't immediately go into shot reverse shot, which I guess is easier than shot reverse shot because you don't have to do it twice maybe, and you have one camera or something, I don't know, but it can fuck you over. The actors have to get the timing right, and it's just interesting how much more similar films were to stage plays back then and how much more similar they could be if we really tried today. George Reeves is interesting. His Clark Kent is not trepidatious, trippy little guy. I'm guessing just because they wanted to cut down on the amount of Superman they had to do. They had to make Clark Kent himself more of a man's man as well, as opposed to like hunched over with glasses. Oh, gee, Mr. White, I didn't even... And apparently Dean Cain based his Clark Kent on George Reeves and his Superman on Christopher Reeve. Which, oh, by the way, if I call George Reeves George Reeve and Christopher Reeves, that's because I'm used to calling Christopher Reeves, but I didn't know that it was Christopher Reeve until that documentary came out last year. Should I talk about that? No, I won't talk about that. It's good. So in my head, I'm just like, oh, one of the Reeves is just Reeve. Is it George Reeve? No, it's George Reeves and Christopher Reeves. I mean Reeve. So if I mix that up, my apologies. But George Reeves is pretty good as Superman. And he's pretty good as Clark. It's fun to see the different interpretations of Clark Kent. I think he should be the Mask. I don't think it should be like that Kill Bill speech.
Superman didn't become Superman. Superman was born Superman. When Superman wakes up in the morning, he's Superman. His alter ego is Clark Kent. Clark Kent is how Superman views us. He's weak. He's unsure of himself. He's a coward. Clark Kent is Superman's critique on the whole human race.
I think a lot of people are like, I can't believe Tarantino believes this is really what Clark Kent is like. He's making fun of humanity. I don't think he thinks that. I just think he thinks Bill is like an asshole, and that's his read of what Clark Kent is. Maybe that's not Tarantino's read. Either way, I'm sure he's pleased with this new one, which I've heard is quite anti-Israel. Anyway, it is interesting to see a Clark Kent that is a bit more reserved and in some ways more similar to Superman. It can go too far to where it's like he doesn't even act different when he's inside the costume. Of course, people would think he's Superman, but still, that can be interesting. And he's not quite the Mask, but he's still hiding something, but he's still what Clark is what I am, but Superman is what I do. I still think that should be the inverse, and Superman should be what he is, and Clark should be what he does to blend in, to be human. But George Reeves's interpretation, he's still fun. He still has quite a big booming voice. He looks a bit old, which, to be fair, everyone kind of looked old back then. So I don't mind. The Lois actress, Phyllis, put her name here, Wilson Phillips, I don't know. She was quite peppy, and she's pretty good for Lois. Her voice is a good voice for like what I'd read in my head when reading those Golden Age comics, and she like drugs Clark in Action Comics #1, and he pretends to go to sleep. She's good. The Mole Men are funny little guys. I like their makeup. I like their gigantic foreheads. It's interesting that in a Red Scare era, they would have a Superman who was so compassionate to aliens. Not aliens because they come from the Earth and not out of space, but they are, aliens. It's interesting that it would be about humans being scared more than it'd be about how bad the aliens were and the invasion and the assimilation, which is what a lot of horror movies were doing with like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and all that. He even calls them Nazi stormtroopers.
You're gonna step aside or we have to make trouble.
Put some lead in him, Luke.
Mr. Benson tried that once already. It didn't work. Now I'm going to give you one last chance to stop acting like Nazi stormtroopers.
Who are you to tell us what to do?
All I'm telling you is that little creature in there has as much right to live as you do. Don't forget, you invaded his world. You sank a pipe 6 miles into the ground. And when he climbed up, you set dogs on him, shot him.
This is 1951. I guess he was already woke. He was already calling people Nazis, which is the wokest thing you can do, apparently. I had some fun with it. It's kind of more of an interesting artifact than as like an artistic expression. Because it is just a cheap B-movie, but it's cool to see the first contained feature-length Superman thing. Even if it doesn't really count as the first movie, because it was more like a TV pilot, really. But if we really want to get into Superman as a movie in and of itself, no strings attached, aside from a sequel that was being filmed at the same time, then we need to get to the cream of the crop, Superman. Richard Donner, 1978, starring Christopher Reeve, Marlon Brando, and Gene Hackman. What a fucking good movie. It's not perfect. The ending is a little bit long. It's a bad omen for Superman Returns, where everything is like a little bit long in that one. And you can tell Bryan Singer was trying to do what Richard Donner was trying to do, which is make everything kind of slow and give every little element a lot of weight. And so a lot of it is like a disaster movie. There's lots of miniatures and charming little destructive effects. But some of it does go on a little long. The card died in the middle of me talking. It feels very inspired by that, and that stuff does get a little too overlong, and it's interesting to see, watching all these movies, how they reflect the trends of their times, like the visual effects in Superman Returns, and like the working out in Superman 4, and the military drone stuff in Man of Steel, but the disaster movie stuff in Superman, the movie, I suppose, was interesting as well, even if I didn't love all of it. And the thing with this movie is that it is Superman more like a vibe, more like an atmosphere than as like a character. Sorry, I think I've been scratching this. So if you heard all that, which is a way of working with the character that has been prevailing ever since, and I don't really like it that much because it kind of takes away from the drama. Like, you could be doing more interesting things with Superman and how he's a refugee from this culture who he grieves this culture he doesn't really know and he's never really a part of, and Lois, he can never really be there for her, and there's so much you could explore there that to make him kind of this vague notion of old-time Americana is a little constricting. But ultimately, this movie puts so much effort and love into Superman, put so much love into making you believe in Superman, in that vibe and in the lore and in the myth of this guy, that, you know, that approach, it works really well in this movie, and you see why that approach of making him more of a myth and less of a real person with internal conflict has prevailed. You can see why Jeff Loeb was really afraid to tackle Superman as a character in Superman for All Seasons, and sets every chapter of that story from a different person's perspective. Like, the first one's Pa, second one's Lois, third one's Lex, and fourth one's Lana, I think. You can see why he was intimidated to tackle Superman as a character because of Donna and how he was so devoted to creating that myth. And it is pretty perfectly cast. I mean, Chris Reeve, he's just Superman, you know? They found the guy in real life. You can't help but smile every time he saves someone. He feels so perfect. Margaret Kidder's Lois is great. So much personality, a little full of herself, but really confident and really always getting the story. And she's so good and has so much chemistry with Chris Reeve. I guess I'll talk about that as well, more in talking about Superman 2. I'll try to talk about Superman 2 as its own movie as opposed to how it compares with the Richard Donner cut released in 2006. I'll probably talk about that after. All I'll say is that I like this one more, which I wasn't expecting, but considering the Richard Donner cut isn't even a complete movie, like a lot of it was just done with test footage they shot for scenes they couldn't get around to. I don't think they used any of the Lester scenes, which makes sense. I'm sure a lot of that was connective tissue that they just didn't have, so it feels like a less complete movie. And I've spent 45 seconds talking about it despite the fact that I said I wouldn't. Anyway, I'll get around to it. But Superman 2, it is interesting how much of it is Donner despite the fact he isn't credited. And you can still feel that Donner touch and that Donner importance and how much weight he's putting behind the romance. There's that famous quote, you get the romance right and everything else falls into place. And that is way more apparent in Superman 2 than in Superman 1, even though that's, you know, it's still important there. Because there's so much more focus. And even though you can tell that Superman 2, the theatrical cut, is stitched together by kind of shoddy ADR and some strategic editing and a few visual effects, you're like, what the hell is that? You know, oh, the dubbing in this is really funny. You can tell every time there's a dub that they put in later, especially with Gene Hackman, because he didn't come back for reshoots because he wanted to be loyal to Richard Donner. And so whenever he's dubbed in, it's a voice double. And I read that before I watched the movie. And I was like, okay, so they got a guy to be Gene Hackman. I wonder how good the voice double is. I wonder if I'll be able to tell. And you can tell every time. Gene Hackman, he had a higher voice when he shouted, but mostly his Lex was much more smug and dry. He's trying to get that lower register of Gene Hackman, but it just sounds like a monster. It just sounds like so growly and weird. You can tell every fucking time. The Richard Lester comedy didn't annoy me as much as I thought it would. There's way less of it than Superman 3, which I'll talk about in a second. But I really like the clashing of Donner and Lester's sensibilities, despite the fact this had two directors and like 40% of the footage was one director and 60% is another. It does feel like a more complete movie and a more whole picture than Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut. And I enjoy it a lot more. What I like about this one is it has less Lex. Gene Hackman, rest in peace, one of the greatest actors of all time. His Lex works in small doses because he's not really a comic accurate Lex. I don't care really about comic accuracy as much as I'd like to see a comic accurate everything on screen. In the grand scheme of things, if it's good, it doesn't matter. Like a good adaptation and an accurate adaptation are two separate things. But yeah, his Lex is still not that Lexy to me, and that's fine. But having less Lex than the Donner cut helped because you could spend more time with the romance. And despite the fact there are some scenes in the Donner cut that I like more, and we'll talk about later, than the ones in the Lester cut, like Lois finding out he's Superman, which is still good in the Lester cut, it feels like there is more of them together in the Lester cut, and it feels like there's more scenes of them talking, which I'm sure Donner was gonna shoot, but he just didn't get a chance to. It's really hard to criticize. Like, you can complain about Justice League 2017 versus Zack Snyder's Justice League because he actually had the time and money to finish it. It was completely his product, while the Donner cut, it started off without him, and then then when he finally decided to join, he was more like a consultant. Like, they took edits to him and then he was like, no, change this, change this. He wasn't that deeply involved, especially not from day one. And he couldn't shoot new stuff because it had been almost 30 years. But Superman 2, the theatrical cut, the stitches are there and it makes it worse than Superman 1. But I just think it's a pretty good sequel. And some Donner stuff in the Donner cut that seems way more wacky and like it'd be Lester. And then there's some stuff in the Lester cut that seems like would be Donner. Especially the last scene, the memory wiping kiss, which is funny. Superman gets those powers and I've seen people complain about them online forever. If you've read one Silver Age comic, it doesn't even register. That's just like, yeah, of course he had a cellophane S. Of course he can clone himself. Why not? Of course he has a vision that can build walls like in 4, but why not? Anyway, that last scene, it has a great rapport between Reeve and Kidder, and it's kind of heartbreaking, and it seems like something that Donner would shoot, despite the fact he shot something else, or I guess he was backed into a corner and couldn't shoot it, but he wanted to. I have no idea. But it seems like something that was Lester's own idea, or at least the idea of his screenwriters, and I thought it worked even better than the ending of Superman 2, the Donner cut, even though that was good. Sorry, I've been spending this whole Superman 2 review talking about how it compares to Donner cut, despite saying I wouldn't, but I like Superman 2 a lot. I haven't even talked about like Zod, because he's fine. Terrence Stamp's good. He's kind of a generic booming villain. I don't really think he compares to Shannon. I think it's like apples and oranges. You can't really do it. And Ursa's fucking beautiful. That's you know, so that's a plus for the movie. I like the Big Brute. I like the added comedy with him in the Lester cut. I think it worked fine. And yeah, you know, Superman 2, good movie. Not as solid and well crafted and mythological as first one, but you can see how it influenced Spider-Man 2, and that movie's better, definitely, but it has that DNA and it still deals with similar themes, and I think it works better. And maybe I like it more than Donner cut just because I saw the Donner cut first, I saw Lester cut second, and they're like, it's more novel to me. I don't know. Or should that work in reverse? I don't know. But I like Superman 2 quite a bit. Certainly better than Superman 3. Superman 3 is the worst Superman movie by a pretty decent margin. You'd think because I liked Lester's additions to Superman 2 that I'd like him doing it the whole way through. But he also didn't have the groundwork that Donner built to really guide him, so he just kind of made it another wacky comedy that he always does, like the Beatles movies and The Knack, How to Get It. I think I haven't seen that yet. It's weird he's the only Palme d'Or winner to make a Superman movie, and he made the worst one. Richard Pryor is in this, and he's not fucking funny at all. No disrespect to the great Richard Pryor, who I remember hearing when I was a teenager, when I was getting more into stand-up comedy. He's he's the GOAT, he's the greatest. And it's like, fucking Superman 3 guy? But I don't know, if you thought he was funny, I'm sorry. I'm sure Jojo Dancer's good. He wasn't funny in this, especially not for me. The villain in this is some fucking... It might as well have been Lex Luthor. Really? It's like a middle-aged witch guy with this sort of ditzy lady friend and another sidekick. That's just the dynamic with Lex and Eve and Otis. They just did the same thing. There's no reason. I guess Gene Hackman didn't want to come back, or they were like, no, let's do something different, and they just didn't do anything different. It's bizarre. And also, he's not a very good villain. What's that? I don't remember what that fucking guy's name is. Here it is. I didn't even remember the villain's name. Gus Gorman is kind of the villain, but he's like the henchman. It's like a Richard Lester comedy, but with Superman, which would be fine. I'd like a Richard Lester fucking Richard Pryor movie. Why not? Too many Richards. There's too many fucking Richards in this series. I saw a review that's like, well, it's a comic accurate movie. This is the most comic accurate movie because it's... And you can tell fucking person never read comics in their life. To be fair, here's my opinion. There is nothing wrong with a wacky comic book movie because comic books are wacky. They're wacky little stories for children, and making something with a bit of humor, like Thor, Love and Thunder. Nothing wrong with a comedy in concept, but a superhero comedy, much like any other comedy, should probably be funny, and this just isn't. I laughed, I think, once in this movie. Put the clip up.
No, I cannot go out with you tonight. No, I'm busy tomorrow night too.
Oh, yeah? Doing what?
I'll think of something.
Like, that was it, and it's the driest joke of the fucking movie. I guess it's kind of interesting to see, especially the opening, to see, like, Richard Lester do the Rube Goldberg machine of trouble. That's an interesting opening to a Superman movie. That's kind of fun. But you're expecting him to solve all the problems, and he just solves, like, 2. So, I don't even... There are some novel moments, and it's interesting to have a Superman movie that starts off with a black man at a welfare office getting turned down. That's kind of interesting, but like, what a nothing movie. Especially visually, this looks way worse than the last 2. The first one was shot by Gregory Unsworth, and a lot of the second one was shot by him as well. He also shot 2001. I don't remember who shot this, but this movie does not look colorful. You know, I saw it in that same review, they were just like, oh, it's a colorful comic book movie. It's like, no, it fucking isn't. The sky is always pretty overcast. Everyone's underexposed, and that fucking gym dance sequence, the lighting is really low, but it doesn't look romantic. It just looks kind of grainy and shitty. Lana Lang isn't that interesting, really. Superman beating himself beating himself off in the car park was kind of interesting. Oh, in the junkyard. But the junkyard doesn't really look that interesting. It looks really dark and dingy, which I know for that part of the movie, it would make sense for it to be dark and dingy because his suit's all dark. It's like the dark kryptonite. But the whole thing is dark and dingy. And all the luxurious high-tech sets just look like a bunch of fucking silver bullshit strapped together. It doesn't look nearly as good as John Barry's work in the first two. It's just not interesting and not funny. And I respect the idea of a director coming in and making this franchise more of their own. But Jesus, I mean, their own wasn't really up to snuff, was it, with the rest of their work? Go watch Help and A Hard Day's Night instead. Way better Richard Lester movies. I think I've covered it. Oh yeah, actually one more thing. There's multiple jokes about the main villain's sister being really ugly. It's like, yeah, nothing's wrong with the camera. That's just how she looks. She's like the most normal fucking looking 50-year-old woman I've seen in my life. It is weird. All right, now we're going to Superman 4. And the thing about this movie is it was made for cheap and it was directed by a journeyman director named Sidney J. Furie, who, as any journeyman director who's made like a million movies, has made some genuine classics. I'd recommend The Ipcris File with Michael Caine as Harry Palmer. It is excellent. One of my favorite movies from the 60s. This movie, clearly Christopher Reeve, they just wanted to get him back, so they gave him more creative control. And the story here is way more sincere and nice than Superman 3. It's probably the movie that cares most about Superman as a character compared to like as a vibe. Out of pretty much every Superman movie up until maybe, I guess Man of Steel kind of cares about him as like a moral question, but this one, I don't know, there's something about it where like Superman's dilemmas and fear and all that, and I think it has better screwball comedy even than Superman 3, the one directed by the comedy director. When Clark Kent is walking and he gets taken away by the thing, and then he walks into a car and then comes out as Superman, and all that was really interesting and I liked it a lot. The thing with this one, it was made for cheap. It was cut down immensely, and you can tell. I don't think it suffers that much, and it's nice that this is the shortest Superman movie aside from Superman the Mole Man, because every other Superman movie feels a little bit too long, aside from, I guess, the Donner cut, which doesn't feel too long or too short, just feels like it has misplaced timing, like too much Zod, not enough Lois, and too much Lex. But this one has, I think, just enough Superman and just enough Clark and just enough Lex and just enough other stuff, and it's one of the most poorly rated comic book movies of all time, and I understand because it's cheesy, but Superman gets tricked into creating his worst enemy because he's throwing away all the nuclear weapons, and then Lex Luthor puts an embryo into one of the nuclear weapons, expands in the sun, and becomes Nuclear Man that will destroy him. It's one of the most Silver Age plots I've ever heard, but it has the worst visual effects I've seen in my entire life. Ever. Because they had barely any budget for the VFX. They did a bunch of VFX shots, and then at the last minute, they're just like, well, we need to cut this down to an hour and a half so we can get more show times in. Then everyone was like, but the budget was already being scraped thin over so many of those visual effects shots you cut. If you just cut them from the beginning, it would have been cheaper and we could have made them better. So that's kind of shitty. Can someone fix this? Like, can someone get the negatives and just fix the lighting and everything, please? I doubt they were well maintained, but hopefully someone, please. I enjoyed this quite a lot. I think it is better than its reputation. And if this movie had good visual effects, it would be seen as the massive course correction on 3 that it really is. I think this is probably as good as Superman 2, honestly, if you can get past the visual effects. And also there's like, there's one scene where Clark finally gets the green crystal and uses it to fix himself, which I think is what he does in Superman 2 as well, and that's never explained, but that's fine. And there's the scene where he's at the farm, and it's just kind of too sincerely trying to make a good impression and fix Superman and make him more inspiring and good, and this movie has the most Superman monologuing about peace and hope and love and cooperation, and it just got to me. It didn't make me cry. I was just like, I am charmed by this. So despite its flaws, despite the fact that John Cryer is very obviously putting on... the camera just ran out of battery. Okay, I'll just finish this audio now then. Despite the fact that John Cryer is obviously putting on a bad accent and everything else, I still was charmed enough by this. And I think it has a great Lex performance as well. I don't know if I'd say it's my favorite Lex performance of the series, but it just has the perfect amount of him. It's funny, he just has hair now for no reason, but I thought it just worked. It was a wonderful little Silver Age plot. It's 90 minutes. It gets in, it gets out, it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's clearly very cheap. And I think this movie has enough good in it to the point where I did not really care. And maybe that's just because Christopher Reeve had an ego and he's like, I want this movie to be actually more Superman focused. He gets 2 girlfriends in this movie. But, you know what? I think it worked. And I think he actually made a pretty good one this time. Sorry to be a contrarian, but I really like Superman 4. Alright, time to charge the camera now. Well, to be fair, what's as good as those? What's as good as Le Vampire, you know? Riddle me that, you kind sensitive souls. I almost said bitch, but Superman, he's a star man, and he's waiting in the sky. He'd like, kindness is the new punk rock. I haven't seen the new Superman, but I've heard that line. Very Democrat, you know? That line. I think punk rock is killing the president with a gun. That's pretty punk rock, not kindness. But you know, in a world where everything's dark and grey, of course. Anyway,